Hey guys, welcome to another video from NZ Pocket Guide. This is the third iteration of our COVID-19 border opening predictions for New Zealand, in which we're going to go countries by countries to estimate when will the border open for travel between your country and New Zealand. Obviously, those are just our predictions and we'll give you a ton of context on why we make those predictions. Check it out. Hey guys, my name is Robin and this is Laura and we are the team behind NZPocketGuide.com, which is New Zealand's largest travel guide. In the wake of COVID-19, the world is not traveling anymore, just because all the borders are closed and there is just a lot of restrictions everywhere. And New Zealand is part of the country that have heavy restriction on traveling into the country. In short, almost no one can come into the country if they are not New Zealand permanent residents or New Zealand citizen. So in this video, we're going to give you a little bit of context on what is the current policy of New Zealand, and those are going to be coming straight from New Zealand government sources. And then we're going to actually tell you straight away, those are predictions, making sure that you understand that we are not going through official information anymore, and we're going to cover our prediction on when we think the New Zealand borders are going to open for your countries. So we're going to get started with a bit of information about the current border restrictions.
Okay, so the current border entry restrictions, which this is coming from Immigration New Zealand, is as follows. The New Zealand borders are closed for all but critical travel. Protecting public health in New Zealand is paramount, and the travel ban applies to all arrivals into New Zealand, whether by air or by sea. So basically, everyone that's basically not in New Zealand on a New Zealand citizenship or resident visa basically can't arrive in New Zealand by air or by sea at the moment. So moving on to who actually can come into New Zealand right now. New Zealand citizens and residents, and again Immigration New Zealand states, you have to have the legal right to come home if you are a New Zealand citizen or a New Zealand resident with valid travel conditions. You do not need approval from Immigration New Zealand before travelling. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Just in short, obviously, if you do have the right to travel to New Zealand as a New Zealand citizen or permanent resident, you do have the right to come to New Zealand. You will still be subject to the quarantines that we will highlight a little bit later. Alright, so there are some limited exceptions if you're not a New Zealand resident or a New Zealand citizen. And so they are as follows. There are a small number of limited exceptions, such as people with critical purpose visas, to the ban on traveling to entering New Zealand. This exception applies to people who already hold a temporary New Zealand visa or don't have a New Zealand visa. If you're not a New Zealand citizen or resident, you legally must get approval from Immigration New Zealand before traveling to New Zealand. There are also exceptions on some vessels. This includes cargo ships, fishing vessels, unloading catch, and ships from Antarctica. So in short, even if you do have a valid work visa for New Zealand, you still do not have the right to come to New Zealand at this stage, and you must seek approval from Immigration New Zealand if you want to do so. The only approval which are currently given are for critical purposes, and some examples are for medical workers, for instance. There is a very small amount of people that can come to New Zealand, and it's highly likely that, sadly, you won't be making those criteria. It's really limited and restrictive.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what happens to people when they do arrive in New Zealand at the moment during the current border restrictions. So a little bit about managed isolation and quarantine, and this is again from Immigration New Zealand. So to help the spread of COVID-19, people who...
I think it's to help stop the spread of COVID-19.
To help stop the spread.
Yeah,
Thank you, Robin. Yeah. To help stop the spread of COVID-19, people who do arrive in New Zealand must legally complete at least 14 days of managed isolation or quarantine at an isolation facility. Returnees will also be tested for COVID-19 during their stay. So basically at the moment in New Zealand, there are hotels that are set up as quarantine facilities at the moment, and people arriving or returning in New Zealand have to spend 14 days in these managed facilities and obviously get tested along the way to make sure that they don't have COVID-19 before being basically released into the community. Okay, and just to go through a bit of what happens if you're transiting through New Zealand. Again, the government sources say that the New Zealand government has transit arrangements with a range of countries to make it easier for each country's citizens to get home. Transit agreements that say who may transit through New Zealand are published by Immigration New Zealand. We recommend you also check if you need to apply for a transit exemption from managed isolation. So basically you need to contact Immigration New Zealand or go on the Immigration New Zealand website to see if the transit agreements apply to you and whether you need to go into quarantine or not.
Alright, so moving on to some visa extensions for people which are currently in New Zealand. So this is still official sources, but that comes from a different source. And basically, we do have still quite a lot of people in New Zealand which are on work visas or even on visitors visa and holiday visas in New Zealand which got stuck here during COVID-19. So the immigration minister, which his name is Chris Fafoy, has announced that those already in the country with a visitor visa due to expire before the end of October 2020 will have their visa automatically extended for another 5 months. This will give them enough time to be able to work out some ways to get back home. And temporary migrants which are unable to leave due to international travel restrictions will receive a new 2 months COVID-19 short-term visa, which will kick in when their current visa expires. So this is basically Immigration New Zealand's trying to help people stay legally in the country, because even if you're still in New Zealand, you do have to legally have the right to stay in New Zealand. We do understand that those are unprecedented times and unprecedented circumstances, but they still have to go through the paperwork. And Immigration New Zealand has created, for example, the COVID-19 short-term visa, and has created some different visas like that to help with that. And that is why at the moment they're not processing any application from people outside of New Zealand, and they're solely focused on processing applications for people which are currently in New Zealand because the paperwork still have to be done. So that's basically what's happening to people currently in New Zealand. Now we're going to be moving on a little bit to our prediction. I think it's time for us to actually give a bit of information about our prediction. So just to make it very clear, this is the end of the official information, and right now we're moving on to the stage of this video where we're doing predictions. So none of those information are official. Please do not think that because we're saying a certain date for a certain country you can start, go ahead, book your flight and book your trip. That does not mean that. It's just to give you a bit of an understanding about why in New Zealand we are going through I'm completely lost right now. It's just to give you a little bit of an understanding about when you can expect New Zealand borders to be open, and making sure that you do understand that it's not going to be tomorrow. So one of the main reason and one of the main factor for the border opening, and one of the things that we took in consideration for this video, is how your country handled the virus.
Yeah, so the way we see it, New Zealand's not going to just open its borders to everyone. It's probably going to open its borders little by little to different countries, depending on how well your country or specific countries that we're talking about are handling the coronavirus currently, and basically how they're controlling the spread. And obviously the less chances that there is for coronavirus to come into New Zealand, the better. So that's more how I guess the New Zealand government are seeing who they're going to open the country or the borders to, and in deciding on which countries to basically open the borders for.
Yes. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context as well about New Zealand and what's happening in New Zealand, so you understand where our predictions are coming from. So one of the things that recently happened, as this video is recorded in September 2020, is that we just finished dealing with our second wave. So the city of Auckland has had to go on level 3 lockdown for I think that was 12 or between 12 and about 2 weeks. I can't remember exactly how many, because we're not living in Auckland. And the rest of the country is still in alert level 2 right now. So we still had an extra outbreak just very recently. So obviously everybody is quite on edge about it. There's another big factor coming up, and we have a national election coming up in New Zealand. It was planned to be this September, but it has been pushed to October right now. So obviously COVID-19 is a big topic in the election. I mean, it's a big topic on everything right now. And depending which government we are going to have, the policy about COVID-19 may completely change. There are some people in the running right now which have made it very clear that they were very willing to reopen the country's border, sooner rather than later. And some other politicians have said that they would like to continue with the current course. So the prediction that we've made right now are, following the current course-ish, just because of how the polls are currently showing for the New Zealand election. So this may completely affect the next video that we're going to be making, probably in about a month, when we're going to want to update our prediction. So be aware that that this is happening as well. And finally, I also want to give you a bit of a train of thought of a theory that we are having, right? So New Zealand's summer is obviously its biggest tourism times, right? And summer in New Zealand runs from?
It runs from December to February.
So December, January and February. And so those 3 months are where New Zealand gets most of its tourists, right? I mean, we personally think that New Zealand's authority may decide to actually keep the border rather close to most countries for those months, so December 2020, January 2021 and February 2021, in order to kind of avoid having the massive influx of tourists that usually summer brings, and then being able to reopen the borders when we have a much lower influx of tourists, in order to kind of getting tourists trickling in, kind of fine-tuning its system and be ready for next summer, when we're going to have a big influx of tourists, because we think that COVID-19 is kind of here to stay and it's not going to be something that's going to be solved instantly. So that's kind of a theory that we have, and you'll see that it kind of reflects a little bit on some of the prediction that we are having. Obviously it is just a theory. It just makes us feel that if we keep on going with this very, very, very cautious course that New Zealand is taking, which is basically completely closing the border, this may be the case. Finally, keep in mind that all those predictions that we're going to be giving you are going to apply to all types of visas for people coming from those countries. So that includes work visas, that includes a visitor's visa, that includes partner's visa. It applies to all type of visas. If you're not a permanent resident in New Zealand or are not a New Zealand citizen, the border restriction probably will apply to you. There may be some exception for students, because students are probably going to want to be staying longer and everything, but we have a full video about students update for coronavirus, so I invite you guys to check this one out. It's on our channel. Just click on our channel and you'll find it out. All right, should we get started with the predictions?
Yeah, I just want to get started by saying sorry about the crazy shadows that are being cast across my face right now. I'm not usually this pale, although I am pretty pale. All right, so starting with Australia, our predictions, and again, these are just our sort of personal predictions, they're not official information, but for Australia, we predict that the borders will open around December 2020 and January 2021. Now, the reason for this is that actually within Australia at the moment, even the states within Australia, especially on the western regions of Australia, haven't even signed the agreement to open their borders within the country, let alone opening their borders for the rest of the world. So that's probably going to get handled first before it's even considered for the borders to be opened between Australia and New Zealand. So that's why we've pushed this prediction back a little bit further from our last video to December 2020 and January 2021. Next, we're looking at the Cook Islands. It's a country in the South Pacific, and we predict that the opening for the borders for those guys will be late October 2020. This is due to the fact that it's one of the earliest countries that New Zealand were thinking about opening the borders with. And on the 19th of June, it was said that the agreement was only weeks away to open the borders. So we're still waiting for those weeks away to happen. So that's perhaps why we're thinking around October 2020 for opening to the Cook Islands. Next on the list is Niue. Niue is, well, it's another country like the Cook Islands that has a special relationship with New Zealand. And although, Niue is a safe country right now, they have no coronavirus cases. They are being a bit cautious to opening to New Zealand, in fact, due to the current
second wave.
The current second wave. Well, the second wave that happened, yeah. So our prediction for that is late November 2020. And then next we have the rest of the South Pacific Islands. So that's countries like Fiji, French Polynesia, Vanuatu, for instance.
Tonga. We like Tonga.
Yeah, we do. So our prediction for those countries are between January and February 2021. The reason being that that usually they sort of in the South Pacific Islands, their high season is during the Christmas time, or what's left of the high season, but because they won't be opening their I'm just losing my words a little bit.
If they're not opening, basically if they're missing the Christmas season, which is one of the biggest kind of tourist draw, then we're going to be left with just their summer, which is the rainy season there, which is the lowest tourist season. So we feel that if they miss out on summer, getting the influx of Australian and Kiwis going there for the holidays, they may just say, oh well, we're gonna get the worst time after that, so may as well just kind of delay a little bit and even be safer. So for this reason, we don't know if they're just going to rush to reopen as soon as possible, because the influx won't be that big. So why take the risk if the influx of tourists is low, because only one tourist can bring all COVID-19. But if you don't bring the financial benefits of tourism into the country, they may just, take an approach of, we're just going to wait a little bit longer and we're going to reopen when we know everybody is going to want to come and visit us.
And there's also the case of French Polynesia, which did open its borders to tourists, and it since then it has had a bit of an influx of coronavirus cases then, so other South Pacific nations might be taking that as an example on whether they decide to open their borders to New Zealand or not.
Yeah. Alright, so moving on to some other countries, we're going to go in Asia right now with South Korea, Singapore and Taiwan, which we're predicting may be opening around March 2021. The example of South Korea is quite stellar. They are handling the crisis extremely well, from what we learned from New Zealand, and therefore they may be kind of one of the case studies of a country that just kind of reopens and reopen its borders with New Zealand. Japan, China and Hong Kong may be following in late March 2021 as well, because China is such a large tourism country for New Zealand that it may just be something that is going to help drive the New Zealand economy back, because tourism is or was New Zealand's largest economy provider, or largest industry and job provider as well in the country until COVID-19 hit. So obviously New Zealand is bleeding money at the moment, or New Zealand's economy is bleeding money right now. So the government may be kind of inclined to get that restarted and get more job on the table with those kind of countries. The rest of Asia, such as the Philippines and Malaysia, we're predicting that just a little bit after, around April 2021. Moving on to Europe, we think that the UK may be the first country that reopened its border with New Zealand in February 2021, just because the UK is part of the Commonwealth and enjoy a very special relationship with New Zealand. And for this reason, we have a hard time considering other countries, even if they're faring better than the UK, opening their borders with New Zealand New Zealand opening its borders to them before the UK. I think it's more going to be a bit more political, but we'll see what happens on this one. So the rest of Europe, we're predicting that for March to April 2021, with probably Germany and Switzerland that may open early, or be some of the first one to reopen as well, because, from what we see in New Zealand, they're handling the crisis very, very well. Moving on to India right now, we're predicting the border opening with India around late March 2021. just because we pushed our prediction a little bit further, just because the recent case increase that has been happening, and in a country with that many people, case increase can be exponentially increased really quickly. So that kind of is a worry quite often. But if you are coming to New Zealand, because I know a lot of people from India are coming to New Zealand to study, we do have a separate video about students visas during the coronavirus crisis, which gives you a very different take and some more insight on that. So that may be a different situation, so you may want to check out this video. And by the way, if you are watching this video right now and find that we try to give you as much complete information as you wish, and you want to keep up to date with this situation and also plan an awesome trip to New Zealand, because we're mostly here to talk about travel, feel free to hit like and hit subscribe. We kind of around to help you guys with your trip to New Zealand. Alright, moving on to North America, we're going to look at Canada. So we're predicting Canada opening in March 2021, just because same thing, they are part of the Commonwealth and enjoy a very special relationship with New Zealand, and they are handling the crisis the best of North America. Speaking of the rest of North America, USA, we are predicting a border opening in April 2021. So obviously, the US is having a big influx of money into New Zealand when coming for traveling and everything. But from what we've seen in New Zealand medias and from New Zealand, obviously we don't know the situation on the ground, but it looks like the situation is not under much control. And yeah, so for this reason, I don't know if that's going to be opening. On top of it, the current president in the US has been calling out New Zealand rather baselessly on our handling of COVID-19. So the relationship between our two governments are not at their best at the moment. And so for this reason, we are having to push our prediction to April 2021. But a lot of things are going to change both in the New Zealand government and the US government. Or nothing is going to change. I mean, there's election on both sides, and it may be completely different situation or exactly the same situation. Who knows? But obviously this prediction will have to be revisited. But so far, we're putting USA at April 2021. Moving on to South America, we're predicting May 2021 for that, because of both major countries, Chile and Brazil, having a very, very, very high amount of cases. So for this reason, we're pushing down to May 2021. Moving on to the African continent, there is very little amount of information given to New Zealand, probably because of some lack of reporting, but also just because of some, and that I'm literally just saying that because of what we see from New Zealand, right? But maybe a lack of interest from New Zealand medias and New Zealand government toward the African continent right now for quick border reopening. So for this reason, we don't have enough information to make a more positive call. So we're going to give South Africa and the rest of Africa an opening to May 2021, June 2021. That would be kind of around those kind of dates.
Yeah.
So that's it for all our predictions. I hope that we gave you enough context on why we made those predictions and on why we actually made those calls. And we always try to obviously make sure to give you as much accurate and official information as we can, and we do that on all of our videos. We also try to give you as much accurate information when we do travel videos as well, because believe it or not, we don't just do COVID-19 videos, and we want to stop doing those videos. We want to get back to just telling you how awesome it is to travel in New Zealand and helping you plan your itineraries during our live sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we want to do. And also, if you do find these videos useful, if you find that our predictions are useful, or you want to see the next ones, because like I say, and like we said before, they are just predictions and things are most likely going to change. The best thing to do is to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon so that you can get a notification when you see it, when we do new videos about the coronavirus border restrictions
and about just traveling in New Zealand. Yeah. We're also live every single week on Sunday at 8 a.m. New Zealand time. We're live for an hour and we answer all your questions about traveling in New Zealand. We usually do itineraries, we tell you the best things to do here. We talk about everything to do with traveling in New Zealand, so you can join us during one of those live sessions. 8 a.m. New Zealand time. There is a link in the description of this video where you can click and you find the time and date in your country for that. So I hope that's useful. In the meantime, stay safe out there. Have a lovely day and be kind to each other. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.
See you later.